Hello everybody, happy Thursday. I hope everybody's having a great start to their day. Today we'll talk about my favorite topic, Russia. So what is happening in Russia? Everybody has been talking about the Navalny situation and what has been happening. He was arrested immediately upon arrival in Moscow airport and he's been detained for 30 days. He's currently in Matroskaya Tishina, which is a special prison cells for people who are involved in high-profile crimes, fraud, politicians, etc. But nevertheless, there's also protests that took place on January 23rd. It was highly publicized on YouTube, TikTok, and everywhere else. And a lot of Western media were saying that the protests are in support of Navalny. Well, it is not exactly true. A lot of protesters weren't in support of Navalny, they just want change. And for them, Navalny's basically indicates that Russia needs change. A lot of them do not believe Navalny will ever make it to be president, etc. However, the protests already happened. They're calling for new protests to happen this Saturday, but nevertheless, let's look at another picture of this scenario and my point of view and what is actually happening further outside of that. So after the protest, of course, some got arrested for actually kicking the police vehicle. Someone hit one of the law enforcement officers. There was additional charges laid against certain individual for inciting extremist activities, etc. Because some people did resort to using physical force, etc. But nevertheless, outside of that, on Wednesdays there was raids completed and organized raids were done in Navalny's wife's house, which is actually an apartment in Moscow, which they own. There's also a rental apartment that they have that there was in Moscow as well, where the raid was taking place as well. There's also another raid was done at his brother's place. Kira Yarmush, who is one of his spokespersons, she was already detained previously for other activities. A couple of days ago, she was brought back to her apartment because they were searching them as well. And also a few other people were searched as well. Navalny Live YouTube studios were searched and everything like that too. So what do I think about everything else? And I actually think right now, and I don't know if it's going to be popular opinion or not, but I actually think at this point Bellingcat is actually hurting Navalny. What has ended up happening, as everybody aware, Bellingcat does an amazing job and there's a lot of investigative journalist work. They're based off donations. However, a lot of people say that they're affiliated with different type of intelligence agencies, but nevertheless, that's outside of the point. And Krista Grozov, he did amazing expose and did amazing work pertaining, obtaining billing. And even though Bellingcat claims that the team that they exposed were actually involved in poisonings, again, it's not proven. It's all circumstantial based on their geolocation, but it's not proven. Even though they say that could be used, it cannot be evidence in the court of law because it's purely circumstantial. However, I don't discredit the great work that Bellingcat does, and I think it's important to point that out. But nevertheless, this is where it gets interesting. On Wednesday as well, Krista Grozov released additional information pertaining to certain members of the group and added at least 2 people that were possibly poisoned by that group. One of them was Asayev, which is actually very interesting and questionable because Asayev, even though he was an oppositioner, he was actually useful opposition for Kremlin. So it's very questionable how everything occurred. And even though Bellingcat says, and the question was asked because Krista Grozov did a few interviews the same day as well, that it is purely circumstantial many times, but then again people are saying that he was poisoned. And of course, but this is what I'm saying about Bellingcat's timing of the release. They keep releasing everything so organized and coordinated, and in 2 weeks Bellingcat said they'll release more information. So what is happening now with those releases? I think they should have waited to release it until March. I think it's great that they're going one after another, one, it's constant releases. But the problem is Navalny is already detained at this point. It is highly likely he will be accused of treason, and I'll tell you why I think this is going to happen, high treason nevertheless. And this is the reasons why I believe this will happen. First of all, the way the search warrants were executed on Wednesday morning, the way everything is being tight-lipped, and the way that now every channel has to put that Navalny is a foreign agent, his organization is a foreign agent, and anybody who works for Navalny's organization, FBK, which is like, anti-corruption fund and Navalny Live, they have to put that. The law came into effect January 1st, but this is outside of the law for anything like that. This is already set in people's minds that Navalny is a foreign agent. Searching his houses or apartments and everything else and his cohorts all indicates, and especially with Bellingcat doing all those releases, and it was televised obviously, and Navalny Live put it out there himself that he was collaborating with Bellingcat when he made a phone call to supposedly the individual who was involved in his poisoning. This is what actually happens in this case. And in this case, I think now Russia, and this is what people don't understand, Russia is not going to be Belarus. It's not going to be Ukraine, where you can have protests, revolutions, orange revolutions, and every kind of revolution. Yes, Russia had 3 revolutions, one of them even was 1917. But in order to have a successful revolution, you have to have a goal, and it has to be a little bit different goal. At the end of the day, and this is what people don't understand, as much as Russia is tolerant, or the new generation, my generation is more tolerant, Russia is still very based on Christian beliefs as far as marriages are concerned, a lot of other factors. And this is just one of the side factors outside of everything else. The most important factors in all of that even Russian populace, if you see on message boards, which have nothing to do with politics, but women message boards, family-run message boards, women are actually mad at their husbands for going to those protests because they believe that Navalny is a foreign agent and he's there to destroy their family units and make all children suddenly change how they view all kinds of other topics. I'm not even going to get into the topics that they're discussing, which is outside the scope of this video. But nevertheless, this is what's happening in Russia right now. And the West is not going to expect that, Putin will order law enforcement to go to protesters and beat every single one of them, or use tear gas, how they used against yellow vests in France and a lot of other places. It's not going to work that way in Russia. He's going to make sure, in the way the raids are operating now, and everything that's leading to it, I believe that Navalny will be charged with high treason. In this case, if that happens, no matter how many leaders, know how many U.S. President Biden that he had a phone call with Putin this week, yes, they agreed for extension of the Smart 3 deal for another 5 years. It's important to point out the new hypersonic weapons are not included in it for Russia. Poseidon, which is underwater nuclear carrier, will not be included in that. Also, Biden does not mean that Russia and U.S. will start having a warm, fuzzy relationship and have restart. That is not what it means at all. None of the above is going to work in that manner. What ends up happening is that, Putin is not a foolish man. And regardless what Navalny's video state and what the palace's portion state, a lot of different factors state, it's not going to be played like that in Russia. If he goes in for high treason charges, that means he'll be convicted of that. That means he'll be in prison for a long time. Khodorkovsky spent close to 10 years, but even his charges weren't treason. So what ends up happening, highly likely Navalny will end up with high treason charge. He'll end up spending over 10 years in prison. Eventually, possibly, he'll be swapped during some type of swap if, in fact, the West will have to, at that point, say that he was working for the West, etc., and they'll take him on in exchange for somebody else. That could possibly happen 10, 15 years. At this point, depending how closely Navalny's wife is involved in that, she could possibly go under those charges. There's also Lyubov Sobol, the lawyers there. She already is, and her apartment was searched as well today and everything else. If she goes for high treason, and it's highly likely more than one person can go for that under FBK, and no protest in the world would change that. Russia has never ever let anybody go that they can think of high treason, and the stage is already set besides the foreign agent, how the searches are done, how everybody's saying that he's an agent of CIA. Also, unfortunately, which is in one way an interesting scenario, U.S. Embassy posted the routes of the protesters on January 23rd. In one way, you can interpret it that they're warning American citizens living in Russia where the protests are occurring to avoid them. In another way, the way Russia is interpreted, that they're actually helping the protester. Therefore, Navalny is an agent and works with CIA and MI6 and possibly involved in another German organization, which was added to that list too. So nevertheless, given all that trajectory, I honestly believe at this point, and I think it would be best for Navalny if the West actually takes a step back. I'm not saying taking a step back fighting for democracy, but I actually believe that a lot of coordinated scenarios will actually lead to Navalny's having very serious high treason charges, because then, it will give Russia carte blanche to say that he's actually involved in the West in such activities. Even though, obviously, yes, he spent time in Germany. Yes, he met Angela Merkel. He was her personal guest. Yes, he worked on that movie while in Germany. But there's a lot of factors in that. And at the end of the day, Russia is going to be Russia. Fighting for democracy in Russia is, yes, it's possible, but it's a very different road. Don't forget, Russia never bends over. What happens with Russia is they will burn everything first, like it happened with French before they'll give French Russia. And the same applies to everything else too. What happened with Gorbachev and how the Soviet Union collapsed, this is not the same scenarios that will happen with Putin. And successor of Putin is not going to be Navalny. It's going to be someone from his circle or someone involved in those type of politics, and it's not going to be changed, or at least until 2036. So I think actually pouring money into staying Russian democracy and doing it for the West is probably not going to pay out at the end of the day. I think there's a lot of other geopolitical angles that the West should look in. For example, my previous video pertaining the new classified base being built in Crimea, that could be Russia upgrading their weapons arsenals. That should be looked at very cautiously. There's a lot of other things that could be looked at with Russia. And also, the more sanctions are given against Russian politicians in the case of Navalny, it does not faze them. All it says, okay, well, we're already under sanctions. What's stopping them for, like I said, Navalny being in prison for 10, 20 years? Nothing. So at the end of the day, I think people should be very cautious how they address certain issues with Russia. And I think Bellingcat should continue their great work and everything like that. But I think the timing of their releases now could actually hurt Navalny and his foundation more than actually, even though those releases are interesting and yes, a lot of people are watching and it does get a lot of attention, but at the same time, not all attention can be helpful. Not all the media releases can be helpful at times too. Anyways, please click like, please subscribe to my channel. Would love to know what everybody thinks. Would love to have a discussion, what everybody thinks will happen. And of course, you can always read my articles on the ChristinaKitova communalnews.com. Thank you again and have a great day, everybody.